Welcome in, folks, to another edition of Berg is the Word. And just when you thought that the Antonio Brown and Oakland Raiders situation couldn't get any crazier, we just found out that head coach Jon Gruden has announced that Antonio Brown will play in the team's season opener on Monday night against the Denver Broncos. All of it. Let's quickly backtrack how we got to this point and how we got here. Antonio Brown wanted out in Pittsburgh. He had, a severed relationship with quarterback Ben Roethlisberger. They went back and forth. Some people thought it was Big Ben's fault. Others thought that it was Antonio Brown's fault. So then he skipped last season, the Week 17 practices, leading up to a game, mind you, that the Steelers needed to win to make the playoffs. Brown didn't play in that game. I believe he was suspended, so he was benched in Week 17 against the Bengals. Then he decides to sign with the Raiders in the offseason, getting a massive free agent contract. We know that he was held out, because he wanted more money and he felt like he wasn't getting that much in Pittsburgh. So he gets his massive contract with $30 million guaranteed with the Raiders. He decides to then bleach his mustache, after of which he had the frozen foot incident, which held him out of a lot of training camp, all the preseason, and the cryo chamber. Then he had his helmet grievances, where the helmet he's played with in his entire career was outlawed because it doesn't live up to the safety measures of the NFL. So you had that whole incident. Then he skipped a walkthrough practice when the team played the Green Bay Packers in Canada. He was fined by general manager Mike Mayock. And when he skipped that, Mayock levied a fine on him, in which he put the letter on Instagram, which what everyone's clamoring about. Now, what they're saying today is that Brown has apologized to the team, and that, again, he did this in front of team captains, in front of, the Raiders brass and everything, and now he is set to play on Monday Night Football. And Gruden says that Raider Nation is excited about it. And we'll see if there's any rust between him and Derek Carr, because the two haven't played in the preseason at all together. And we saw, when teams don't have reps together, a lot like you didn't really see much of Mitch Trubisky last night, and both Chicago and Green Bay's offenses struggled. We'll see if the Raiders have some of the same struggles in the Monday night game against Denver, 10:15 Eastern time. That's the second of two games that night. Denver enters this game as a 1.5-point favorite. We'll see if the line shifts at all now that we know that Brown will be playing in this game on Monday night. But I want you to think about this for a second in your own place of work. If you put a letter on social media calling out your employer for disciplinary action, if you would still be employed if you did something like that, which Antonio Brown did too. Or if the next day when your boss goes to address that with you, whether or not you would still retain your job when you get into a verbal argument and you threaten that you're going to beat up your boss. I just want you to think about that in terms of wherever you work, in your place of work, wherever you are in this world or this country, where you'd be able to threaten a boss like that and then still keep your job moving forward. I wonder if the Raiders explored their legal ramifications on whether or not how much money they would be able to get back if they were able to cut Antonio Brown, but then retain the salary that is guaranteed to him because he wasn't fulfilling his contract. I wonder, how much of that was explored, but it appears now that that will all be a wash and that Brown will go ahead and play on Monday Night Football after what has been a tumultuous offseason. A lot of people on social media were saying the last few days that Hard Knocks left too soon with all of the fallout that there's been with the Raiders. And it's been absolutely unbelievable. A lot of people thought and speculated that Brown would be cut by the team and that he might sign elsewhere for a lesser salary. But it appears now, at least according to Coach Jon Gruden, that Brown will go ahead and play in Monday night's game. So if you're on the East Coast like I am, you might have to stay up. Again, it's a 10:15 kickoff. Each year they have 2 Monday night games the opening week of football, and so you might have to stay up and watch this or catch the highlights on Tuesday morning, certainly, just to see how all of this unfolds and if anything else happens between now and Monday night. Just because we still have 48 to 72 hours until kickoff. But again, apparently Brown apologized to the team. Apparently, it was an emotional apology. But again, going on social media in touting about your employer disciplining you. If you did that, what ramifications would there be? Would you either be suspended or fired by your employer? And again, threatening your boss and, not showing up to team walkthrough, not showing up to practice, the helmet grievance, the problems he had with his feet, which the team stood behind him, at least in terms of both the feet and the helmet issues. And so, but if he's not fulfilling the terms of his contract, any employee, it's hard if you work for whatever it is that you do to have sympathy for a guy who's doing these types of things. And I think it speaks to how talented Antonio Brown is at the wide receiver position and the production that he brings to the Oakland Raiders. And I don't know if Derek Carr has played quite with an offensive talent quite like Antonio Brown, which is why they're willing to endure his shenanigans to this point. And I really think we'll see how this plays out. But at least for the time being, Antonio Brown will continue to be a member of the Oakland Raiders. And wow, I just wish the Hard Knocks cameras would have still been there a week later to capture the spats that Antonio Brown had with general manager Mike Mayock on the practice field. Apparently, the two had to be separated, and Vontaze Burfict had to hold Brown back. If you saw on Twitter yesterday, O.J. Simpson went on and was frustrated and said, hey, knock it off, because Simpson not only drafted Brown on his fantasy team, but also quarterback Andrew Luck. But I want you to think about this too. The moment O.J. Simpson starts giving you advice, and the advice that O.J. Simpson gives you is actually sound advice, is actually good advice, that just shows you how far this has played out with Antonio Brown. And we'll see what ends up happening on Monday night. Again, Oakland, a 1.5-point underdog. I'm going to be watching to see if that line moves at all with the announcement that Antonio Brown will in fact play on Monday night. But, for the Raiders, if you're a Raiders fan, you're probably happy because, again, there's no denying the talent that Antonio Brown brings. But is this really a playoff team? And is it worth having to put up with this soap opera off the field and everything that you've had to deal with Antonio Brown off the field? Will he continue to generate headlines, or will he go and produce on the field and we'll kind of forget about what has been an absolutely bizarre offseason? And so, again, if you're the Raiders, if they were able to get back that $30 million guaranteed, is it worth hanging on to Antonio Brown, even if your team's not going to make the playoffs? Or do you think that, he might be a key piece that determines whether or not the team makes the playoffs? That's another question you have to ask yourself. And you have to wonder from a legal standpoint, if the Raiders were to have cut Antonio Brown, how much of that $30 million guaranteed on his contract would they have been able to claim? And again, because Brown didn't show up to walkthroughs in Canada and didn't show up to practice and everything, he's already foregone some of the money that he was owed. I've read as much as $1 million. Now, I don't have the exact figure on that, but again, if he's not fulfilling the duties of his contract, that letter from Mayock shows, hey, you need, they're setting legal precedent saying, hey, this is not what we're expecting, in terms of your workplace performance and to what we signed you for and to what you agreed to as well. And that's pretty standard in really any place of work as well. But again, we will see what ends up happening. Antonio Brown going to play Monday night for the Oakland Raiders, and we'll see if there's any wrinkles further in this saga. I am absolutely fascinated to see how this plays out. But again, And if you're a fantasy owner too, I mean, at least from a fan, I mentioned the gambling line, the Raiders, a 1.5 point underdog against Denver for Monday night's game. From a fantasy football standpoint, if you drafted Brown in your league, you'll have he will play in week 1. Now, how productive he might be, that's going to be a huge question, just because he, how much has he practiced, how much rapport has he developed with Derek Carr and the rest of the Raiders offense. That will be what everyone has their eyes on Monday night headed into Tuesday morning, just because, again, a 10:15 Eastern time kickoff. A lot of people I know will be winding down from their Monday night. They'll probably watch the first game, at least if you're a football fan. Might, see how the game unfolds early on. But a 10:15 kickoff is a late start on Monday night. But again, might have a reason to watch now because Antonio Brown is back for the Raiders. Again, my name is Mark Bergen. If you enjoyed this discussion, please feel free to share it and retweet it with your followers. I'd certainly appreciate that. But I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. Hope all of you have a terrific rest of your Fridays, great rest of your weekend. I'll see you next time. So long, everyone.